What is going on, Colts Nation? Welcome back to another episode of Bring the Juice. Your guys, Derek and Cody, with you as always. And guys, I wanted to talk about this video because I think most Colts fans, after watching this Sunday's win versus the Baltimore Ravens, I think it's safe to say that the presumption of who the starting quarterback should be going forward should no longer be a question. I know that we had some people that even whilst, we've seen Anthony Richardson have these issues early on, people have been questioning, and we even talked about it all throughout the offseason, who is going to start the season and who wasn't. I think it's safe to say, after seeing what we saw today, that it's clear that Anthony Richardson should remain the Indianapolis Colts starting quarterback moving forward so long as he is healthy. Cody, I mean, I think it's safe to say that you and I both had that feeling regardless of how this game would have went down. But we have had people that have been asking, and I even remember in the stream prior to the game, I did have people asking me, like, if Gardner has an amazing day, does he still get the nod to stay in as the quarterback going forward? Because the Colts haven't lost with him as the starter or even as him playing. So does he deserve to get the nod to just stay there? I say no. What say you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty obvious. I mean, the talent is it's very clear. Now, I want to preface it by saying this. I don't think Gardner Minshew was terrible. Like, I don't think he was outright terrible. That's not what we're saying at all, by saying this. But I think you just kind of saw, Derek, as much as we love Gardner Minshew, you've seen now why he's on his third NFL team in his short career so far. Like you just see that because he is a backup quarterback. He's that guy that can come in and just like he did last week and just like he did this week, he can keep the boat afloat, like he can keep the ship right in the right direction. But when it comes to the starting quarterback, I mean, we talked about it and we were texting a little bit, I know, like during the game, and you just wonder, man, if you had Anthony Richardson in this game, could this have been, I don't know if I'd say a blowout because that's probably a little extreme, but like, could you have won by more than what you won by? Could you have won in regulation? Could you have won potentially, with, Richardson and what he's able to do? And, as well as your defense was playing, as well as your special teams was playing, Matt Gay, we all know that. Like, could you have won, with Anthony Richardson and won even more? Because if you look at this offense, Derek, in Sunday's matchup, the running game was going very well for the majority of the game. The offensive line, I thought, played fine. There was obviously the sack issues, but I know we both kind of said, you kind of blame that a little bit more on Minshew than you do on Anthony Richardson. You kind of expect him to have a little bit more awareness there, being a veteran, but that's neither here or there. But going back to my point, like, when it comes to Gardner Minshew versus Anthony Richardson, right? Gardner Minshew's never going to be the guy, right? He's never going to be the number one franchise quarterback. Like I said, there's a reason he's been now on three NFL teams. He's only 27 years old. So with that being said, no, Gardner Minshew should not be the quarterback. And with how good your offense, was, on Sunday in certain ways, and certain guys making plays. I mean, I think the big thing we can all agree on, Derek, is probably that Gardner Minshew was the worst performer out there, which is saying something, considering the offense only scored 22 points and it took them 5 quarters to do it. But yeah, I mean, I think you look at this and you look at Gardner Minshew, you look at this Colts team right now, and you say, hey, they can run the ball now. They've got clearly a number one receiver in Michael Pittman Jr. Josh Downs looked good. They've got some pieces here. Now, if you add that element, that is Anthony Richardson, with obviously what we know he can do, passing the football, down the field and all those things. And they can get that going, and then what he can do on the ground. I mean, we've seen that. 2 rushing touchdowns in the first quarter of Houston's game. If he's able to protect himself a little bit better, I mean, that's just, frankly, Derek, an element you just didn't have on Sunday. And that's okay. Like, there's very few quarterbacks that are like Anthony Richardson for a good reason. And so, Yeah, I mean, I think, it's great that he was able to do what he did and really was 2-0, has been 2-0 in the last two games. But yeah, I mean, I think, especially in this performance, Derek, Gardner Minshew wasn't the reason why you won that game. It was your defense and Matt Gay, and in your running game, I guess.
Yeah.
He made a couple throws. Like, I'm not acting like he was terrible. He made a couple throws. You're like, okay, those are good throws. But he also had some things where you're like, oh man, if Anthony Richardson was in there, I'm not saying like it would have gone a lot better, but like he just has a different element, a lot of different. He just makes your offense more dynamic, I guess. He can make plays out of nothing. We've seen him do that before. That just wasn't an element you had. So Minshew's a very good backup, but he is a backup for a reason.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go ahead and just hop out and preface this right off the back and right off the beginning. I think every Colts fan is very appreciative of Gardner Minshew being here. I think everyone understands that Gardner Minshew has a role, and Gardner Minshew has filled that role very, very well. That backup QB role, when your starting quarterback is not in, Gardner Minshew goes out there and, even despite his limitations, is able to somehow win you games. Is it always pretty? No. But does it work? It does. And that's what you ask of him. And that's the thing. You mentioned a great point of, we feel like we've seen the ceiling of Gardner Minshew. And it's not, I don't think it's much higher than this. I don't really think it's much higher than this. And if this is the height of it, I don't see a situation where, it really translates to a ton of wins down the field. Of course, Shane Steichen, if he has Gardner Minshew as the quarterback, your offensive playbook diminishes greatly and you have to change the scheme up. Completely different to what Anthony Richardson's scheme is. And that was the thing where we saw, even from just 5 quarters of watching Anthony Richardson, you watch a lot of those plays and you say to yourself, my God, like what if Richardson was in that game? You mentioned it, like the 5 sacks that Gardner took. 4 of those were Gardner Minshew failing to recognize the blitz and just holding on to the ball too long. I mean, how many of those could have been avoided if Anthony Richardson was the one, throwing the football? What if he was him and that athletic ability? There's no one on that defense that's as athletic as he is. I mean, and then of course that 4th down in overtime when the Colts were in 4th down at the 45-yard line, 4th and 1. You run an RPO with Gardner Minshew, and like, no, everyone and their grandmother knows that Gardner Minshew is not holding that football. So that makes no sense to run that. It was one of the few plays where I thought to myself, like, Steichen, what are you doing, dude? Like, that's the stupidest thing you could have ever ran. Like, just imagine that being that situation and they decide to run that with Anthony Richardson. Could that have been a situation where Anthony Richardson uses his athletic ability to open things up? Right? Like, that's the situation you're thinking to yourself. It's a lot of what ifs, and it's quite possible this game could have went the same exact way. But at the same time, you say to yourself, I mean, if you're going to have a quarterback that can't recognize blitzes and can't athletically get away from the pressure like your other quarterback can, then why not just have Anthony Richardson in and make those same mistakes? But at least he's learning to not make those mistakes and is getting better along the way, right? You said Gardner Minshew's 27. He's now on his 3rd team. He's no longer a starter anymore. The better end of his career is over. Anthony Richardson's career is just getting started. And we're already saying how the offense looked so different under Gardner Minshew versus Anthony Richardson, and not particularly in a good way. So, I mean, it just all makes it more sense that, yes, Minshew is the veteran and they win games with him, barely, but they win games. And Richardson's the young guy, but at the same time, Richardson has already shown you enough. He fits Steichen's offensive mold and scheme much more than Minshew does. And once Richardson's back, Richardson unequivocally needs to be the starter and continue to develop.
I think you made some good points there. I want to just reiterate because I think they were really, really good. You talked about, just with, Anthony Richardson and what he's able to do. You're right. It does really limit your playbook and what you're able to do. How much of that you wonder, do you have to kind of just throw out, when Gardner Minshew's in there versus Anthony Richardson, and just the ways your offense can be creative and the ways they can attack a defense, just completely different with a quarterback, that's so physical and so, athletically gifted as Anthony Richardson, where he can beat you any way, running the football or throwing the football, versus a quarterback that's more of a traditional pocket passer. That does limit your offense. And so you don't want to have that situation where your offense can't use the full capacity of your playbook and the full advantage of having a quarterback of that stature. And then I like the second point that you brought up about, Anthony Richardson. Like, you'd rather have a young quarterback if he can't ID the blitz, but he can make up for it with his athletic ability, versus a 27-year-old quarterback who can't figure that out and can't escape the pressure. And in the best way, we've said this from the beginning, Derek, why would you take a guy number 4 if you're not going to play him? Like, why would you do that? So it just wouldn't make any sense for the Colts, regardless to, even if Gardner Minshew was fantastic, it wouldn't make logical sense to bench Anthony Richardson at this point and start Gardner Minshew over him, because, again, this whole season, win or loss, and the Colts are winning more right now than we thought they would early on, but win or loss, this season hinges on the development of your young passer. That's it. Like, that is the clear and most obvious thing that you are focused on this year, is how does Anthony Richardson look? And, he's already missed basically 2 games because of the injury. He's missed, I guess now 8 quarters. I think it's about 8 quarters or so.
Yeah, basically 8 quarters worth of play. Yeah.
Add over the overtime. So, he's missed 8 quarters already. So if he's good to go, I don't think you think twice about it. You give him the start, you let him learn, and you let him grow. Now, again, Minshew has some things on Richardson. He has the experience piece, right? He has some things that he can do mentally that Richardson maybe hasn't learned yet. And that is definitely an advantage. But I don't remember who said it. Maybe it was Jim Irsay, or I don't remember who it was, but somebody said, we could go have Gardner go out there and potentially win a few more games. But at the end of the day, it's all about that young quarterback. And that's so true. And so, yeah, I think for all those reasons, it wouldn't make a whole lot of sense for the Colts to kind of almost backtrack in a way and go back to Gardner Minshew, because he was kind of the starter at the beginning of camp and stuff. I think it just makes sense. You've already named him the starter for the season. Continue to play him when he's healthy, and just let him develop, man. That's what it's all about. So, yeah, definitely agree with you there. Gardner Minshew, as good as he's played, like you said, we really appreciate him. He's a great backup to have in a situation like this. But at the end of the day, this is not Gardner Minshew's franchise. This is Anthony Richardson's franchise. And the Colts just need to simply play him. And Gardner Minshew has a great role in this team. And if he needs to be called upon again, I know he'll be ready. But, yeah, as far as it goes, Gardner Minshew is a backup quarterback for a good reason. And Anthony Richardson was taken number 4 overall for a good reason. And so that is the reason why the Indianapolis Colts definitely have to just continue to start Anthony Richardson.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I think that's going to do it for this one, guys. Let us know your thoughts on this whole situation. I know probably the majority of Colts fan base will be thinking the same thing, but anyone that disagrees, feel free to comment and let us know your thoughts. But that's going to do it for this one. Thank you guys again for all the continued support. And as always, guys, go Colts.